for this, would remove themselves, it would go back to nothingness as if it didn't even exist to begin with. So what we ended last class with was on the bottom of page 20. We ended with a Hasidic thought. So sometimes what I like doing is if we end with a thought, we'll start the next class with that same thought to segue back into it, the idea. So the bottom of page 20, if you don't have it if you don't have a book, that's fine. I'll just read it and then I'll pull up the Kindle for the actual text. But the Hasidic thought says as follows. The so-called act of creation is really a process. It is the story of the one entering the many. It is the story of the formless, infinite, gradually garbing itself in a host of different forms. Creation means that God did something to himself. His energy emerges, gushes forth, and becomes the universe. So this is already going to give us a key. If you recall in our introduction, we said that we're going to be clarifying the verse of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And the way we commonly understand Hashem Echad, God is one, just means God is one and there's no one else. There's no two. But over here, the Hasidic way of understanding Hashem Echad is more that everything in the creation is all part of God. It's all one with God. It's not a separate existence. It's not a separate creation. Everything is part of God. So that last line over here, his energy gushes forth and becomes the universe. That's the way we have to understand Hashem Echad. That it's not even an entity of God that now is separate. It is part of God. And we see that clearly in this teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, that creation would only exist from God and can only continue to exist from God, which means if God's letters that he used to create the world would leave for a moment, it would not exist at all. What that means is the creation doesn't have any independent existence. And real existence is only something that could be independently existing. And we see in creation that it wouldn't. And we see this from the verse of Tehillim, chapter 119, where it says, forever, God, your words stand in the heavens. The way the Baal Shem Tov is understanding that verse to teach us is that literally the letters that God used to create the world is standing in the heavens. So we're just in the middle of this idea, and on page 21, we're going to expand this idea. We're going to elaborate on it. We'll start again all the way from the top of the page. I guess, from the bottom of page 20, just to continue this idea. It's a flow. I think we're like right in the middle, but let's see it on the Kindle. Okay, so we're just going to go back a few paragraphs. I just want to expand this a little. Here we go. So we're all the way at the bottom of the Kindle page now, or the bottom of page 20 if you're looking inside. The Baal Shem Tov explained, your word, God, that you said in the 6 days of creation, such as let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, etc. These Hebrew words and their constituent letters forever stand in the heavens, since the energy of those letters is embodied in all the heavens forever to energize them. As the verse states, the words of our God shall stand forever. And we say your word lives and sustains forever. So normally we look at language as a convention to describe something which is real and actual. For example, a chair exists regardless of what we call it. The word chair is merely a label that we all agree upon so that the piece of furniture can be identified. But here the Tanya invites us to re-envision the relationship between language and reality. The universe, we are told, only exists by virtue of divine or Hebrew language, which means language is reality and existence is convention, which is, I love this. I know we read this last week. I found this teaching to be so incredible in the words of this translator, that usually a chair or a table, it exists regardless of what you call it. We just have a way to communicate it as a convention to refer to the chair or the table. But now the way we're understanding it is the words used to bring something into existence, or the name of that chair in Hebrew, that's actually giving it the life force. And the existence is a convention. The words with which God, I'm back in the text now, the words with which God creates the universe are not incidental or a mere label of convenience. They are the energy of the universe, the very power which endows us with existence. The letters are more real than the universe itself. The universe only happens to exist because God has uttered a particular string of words and letters. For if the letters would disappear for a moment, God forbid, and return to their source within God, all the heavens would become absolutely null and void. And it would be as if they never had existed at all. Just exactly as it was before God said, let there be a firmament. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm just going to read a practical lesson that we have on page 21 of the book. And I forgot to let Lynn in. So if you don't have this, if you don't have the book, that's fine. I'm just going to read the practical lesson, and we could discuss it, or if you have any questions. While they are recorded just once in the Torah, God's 10 creative statements are uttered continuously to endow the universe with existence. If God's creative statements would stop even for a moment, the universe would cease to exist. So look at the world as a vibrant, pulsating garment of the divine. What a beautiful meditation to have, that when you look at creation, really any part of creation, if you want to see it for what it really is, you'll see divine energy pulsating through that creation. Because what's really giving that existence is the Hebrew letters that God used to create it. So even though in the Torah, the 10 utterances, which were let there be light, let there be a firmament, let there be the waters, and let there be the vegetation, the plants, the trees, the birds, the animals, the fish, etc., all those 10 utterances that God used, those letters are actually giving life to everything in existence. And that's the vitality deep inside everything. It actually says that, and I think maybe I mentioned this previously, that it says that a tzaddik, a few days before they pass away, they're able to see the depths or the truth of the existence. They're able to see the Hebrew letters that are giving divine energy to every existence. There's a quite a famous story with the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe. His name was the Rebbe Rashab. He passed away young. I think he was 54. Passed away in 1920 in Rostov, which is far-flung part of Russia that he had to flee to because of the revolution. And it says before he passed away, he was lying on his deathbed, basically, and he asked people, "What do you see?" He was looking at the beams, and they told him, "We see beams." And he says, "I see the words of God that are giving life to it." Like he saw the Hebrew letters, which is obviously, someone like the Rebbe Rashab, we're not on that level, but he was able to see creation for what it really is. Just to tell you how we know we're not really on his level, it says that he was studying, and in the kitchen, some of the people that were cooking in the kitchen, they were talking words that were gossip, lashon hara, things that he didn't want to pay attention to. And so basically, he continued studying, but they only realized a few days later that he actually lost hearing in his right ear, and that was the ear that was closest to the kitchen. So when he was, sitting and his right ear was towards the kitchen, he lost hearing in that ear, which is quite crazy. Yeah.
Who was it who saw letters rising when the Torah was burned?
Rabbi, that's a great example. Rabbi Hananya ben Teradion. In the Talmud, it says a story also that when he was being killed by the Romans, a great rabbi was wrapped in a Torah scroll. And he asked the students, "What do you see?" And they said, "We see a Torah scroll burning." And he says, "I see a parchment burning, but I see letters flying." He saw the letters that were in the Torah actually flying up to the heaven. Actually talking about a Torah, I'm preparing for, Rabbi Rice has an annual Marin Summer Yeshiva, which is taking place starting on Sunday. So I'm preparing a class called Judaism and AI. And there's not much. I mean, I guess I could, put it in AI and see and let them produce a class for me, but I haven't tried that yet. Um, so anyway, I'm doing a lot of research to almost create a class on this. And I saw this really cool video of a machine, a robot basically, writing a Torah,
Mhm.
literally perfectly. It was actually fascinating to see. I think in Germany, out of all places, like a Torah being written there. But
In all places, yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think
There's some irony in that.
so. Anyway, the back inside, what we see over here is that the true life behind everything is actually the words that God used in creation. And let's take it back inside.
It's so personal.
Right, they would lose their job, right? Okay, so all the way at the top. A letter is a linguistic vehicle through which an idea may be expressed. God's letters are similarly vehicles or packets that deliver divine creative energy to the world, which are crucial to its existence. The key emphasis here is that the creation of something from nothing is an ongoing process. God must constantly will all of existence into being. Otherwise, the universe would revert to primordial nothingness. God's word must continually be spoken to ensure the ongoing existence of every creation. So it has to be continuous. Creation was not a one-time thing. Creation is a continuous, constant event of God speaking and the world's being created. So the same is true of all the creations in all the worlds, upper and lower, and even this physical earth, even completely inert matter. Inert is like I don't know how to translate inert, but in Hebrew the word is domem, which is inanimate, like mineral, like water, stone. Is that the way to translate inert? Is that how you would?
Inert, unreactive.
Right, unreactive. So
Yeah.
it's actually interesting. In Hebrew, the word is domem, which we usually translate as inanimate, things that are inactive or in unresponsive. Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's something that's inert, doesn't react with its
Doesn't
surroundings.
react.
Kind of
But in
yeah.
Hebrew, the word domem actually means silent. It means it doesn't talk back or it's quiet. It's not as if a plant really talks to you, but a plant is not considered inert. A plant grows; it has more of a life than a stone that would be considered in Hebrew a domem, which is literally what actually means silent, which is interesting. Um, if the letters from the 10 statements, which the earth was created in the 6 days of Genesis, would disappear from the heavens, earth, or even from inert matter, for a moment, God forbid, the heavens and earth would return to be absolutely null and void, exactly as they were before the 6 days of Genesis. So even just to pause here for a second, we in Torah literature, we know that the world is divided into four kingdoms or four groups. The highest of them is the human. It's in Hebrew it's called midaber, which means speak, the speaking group. Then you have lower than that is the Saya, which is the animal kingdom or the animal group. Lower than that, you have the vegetative, the plant, the ones that don't have the same feelings like animals, but they're still alive. They still grow. They still require water and nurture and sun, and they have to still be connected to a source. And the lowest of them would be the kingdom of, in Hebrew, it's known as domem or inert or inanimate, which are the ones that um, don't speak, don't feel, but even those have a life force that is created by the 10 utterances from God. And if what we're saying here is any of these kingdoms, from the lowest to the highest, but even the lowest, if the letters of God that created them would be removed for a second, it would return to that creation would return to absolutely nothing, as if it never even existed to begin with, which is exactly as it was before the 6 days of creation. Total nothingness. Chabad discourses often illustrate this idea with the analogy of a stone thrown into the air. In order to continue its ascent and counteract the gravitational pull downwards, the stone requires a continual supply of kinetic energy provided by the initial thrust of the hand. As soon as this energy is exhausted, the stone begins to fall. The upward motion of the rock is analogous to the existence of the world. If God's creative input were to cease, the world's existence would revert to its more natural state of nothingness. So just to explain this, just to make sure this is like as a child, when we are taught Tanya, this is the most famous example that is being given for Shar Yichud V'Emunah. What's interesting is the Alter Rebbe doesn't put the example in the text, but it's often taught together with this chapter. So if you have a stone, naturally the stone is pulled downwards from the laws of gravity. So if you would just drop a stone, it would fall. If you want the stone to go against its nature, which is to throw it and make it go upwards, it needs to have the force of the thrower that's giving the momentum to the stone and pushing it upwards. But as soon as that momentum or that thrust, that push from the thrower is exhausted or is disappearing from the stone would revert to its original state, which was to be on the ground. It would fall. So similar to that, the the um, the default state of world is nothingness. The only way it is brought into existence is by God speaking, and it comes to be. But through God's speech, the world exists. So in order for the world to continue to exist, it's almost like the stone needs to be constantly being thrown, or in this case, God's words have to constantly be in the creation to give it existence. And if it were to leave for just a moment, it would cease to exist as if it's not even there. I did read somewhere. I was always confused, even just preparing for the class. I was confused why. I always thought that this example of the stone is actually brought in the text of the Tanya, and it's not. And I read somewhere just recently, I read why it's not in the text if it's such a good example that is similar to how the stone needs the thrower's momentum to constantly to be go against its nature. The world needs God's words to give it existence, which is against its nature. The reason why the Alter Rebbe didn't put it in the text is, I think, what I understood from my research, that even after the stone it was thrown, and we say it reverts back and it's back to its original state, it still is a stone that was thrown. Either it's in a different place than it was before, or it has the fingerprints of the thrower on it. There still is some resemblance, some remnants that the stone was thrown. Whereas by Hashem creating the world, if the letters that God used to create the world were to leave, it would have no resemblance at all that it was ever even in existence. There would be no semblance. Like you go to a place, you could tell that someone was there before. You could tell that there was some, guy like yesterday I had to bring Benzi to an appointment in San Rafael, and I went on the 101 at the worst possible time. I don't know if you guys saw this, but right by the Ignacio exit, there was a truck that was overturned and basically blocked the whole 101 north, the whole 101 south, and traffic was horrendous. But even after they removed it, there still is some remnants of either glass that's broken or a metal pipe that's on the side. There's some remnants of it. But what we're saying over here is that with Hashem creating the world, if those letters were to be removed from the existence, from the creation, it would be as if it never even existed to begin with. And I think that's why the stone parable, while it's pretty good, it's not even in the text because it's not perfect, because the stone would still have some resemblance that it was thrown. Yes, Lynn.
So my question in Bereshit in verse 2, when it says V'ha'aretz hayta tohu v'choshek al panei hatahom, so you're saying it would go back to the tohu vavohu, or before that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think tohu vavo would be the right term. Over here, it actually uses the term ayin va'efes. Let me pull that up again.
But if Hashem touches something and withdraws it, doesn't something still have part of his essence? I mean,
I'm sorry, say that again. I was just trying to find the term. Yeah.
so
Say that again.
if Hashem touches something, makes utterances, and is withdrawn, doesn't what is left behind still have part of him, his essence? Isn't it still there?
So you would think so, but over here we're saying is that the natural state of creation is non-existence.
Yeah.
So if it were to be removed, the divine
Go
energy,
back to
it
void
would go back to void, and you wouldn't even see any resemblance at all.
because nothing was there.
Right.
Period.
Right.
Thank you.
But what I understand from Shira is that you would think that whatever godliness is touching, there's always going to be some eternal remnants of it being there. There's actually a famous many of us are familiar with the Alter Rebbe, who's the author of our beautiful Tanya. He was imprisoned in 1797 in Russia in St. Petersburg, and the it was 53 days that the Alter Rebbe was in prison, and he came out on the 19th of Kislev, which is in December, which is a very, very special day in the Chabad world. We don't even say Tachnun, which is the penitent prayer after the Amida. It's like considered like a holiday. And actually, for those that study a daily a piece of the Tanya, we conclude it and we restart it every year on the 19th of Kislev. So it's a very special day. So when the Alter Rebbe was in prison, obviously back then he was arrested on a wagon and he was brought to the prison, but it was a Friday that he was being brought, and he didn't want to travel on Shabbos. So he asked them if you could pull over, if you could actually go to the nearby town and stop there for Shabbos. And they said, you're a prisoner, you don't get to choose. So there was a story, different events that happened. First, the wheels of the wagon broke, so they replaced the wheels, and then the horse died, and they replaced the horse. And then, even with the horse and the new wheels, they weren't able to move anymore. So they realized this prisoner is no one regular, and they asked if we could just move over and spend Shabbos not on the road, if we could just move over and spend Shabbos under the tree by the shade. And the Alter Rebbe agreed, and they got the wagon. They moved the wagon, and they spent a 25-hour Shabbos off the road. It's crazy to imagine the author of our Tanya had to spend the Shabbos off the road in some forest. And years later, Hasidim, and there was a really giant of a Chassid who was traveling and on that same road, and he was able to point to the exact spot where the Alter Rebbe was spending Shabbos. And they said, "How do you know?" And he said, "Because all the other trees were dried up, and this tree was still lush and green." And he says, "This has to be the tree because if a tzaddik spent time here, it has that remnants that remains." So you could see the energy that is remaining strong. So I think Shira's question was similar to that, where there has to be some resemblance. But over here, it's one of the most important parts of the chapter that the natural state of the world is nothingness, doesn't have independent existence, and therefore the only thing bringing existence to it is the divine energy, God's creation, God's utterance bringing creation. And if that were to leave, it would be return to absolute nothingness. And Lynn, just going back to what you were saying, the Hebrew words that it uses over and over is ayin v'efes. It doesn't say tohu vavo, but I think that's um, um, a similar terminology. Okay. It looks like we're up to another. I'm looking back inside. We're up to another Hasidic thought. So, like I mentioned in the last few chapters of the previous section, there were no Hasidic thoughts or practical lessons. But over here, it seems like he's making up for it with starting this book with plenty of them. So, for those that have the book, it's on page 22 at the bottom. And I'm going to read the Hasidic thought. Before anything was emanated, there was only the infinite one, which is in Hebrew known as Ein Sof, which was all that existed. And even after he brought into being everything which exists, there is nothing but him. And you cannot find anything that exists apart from him, God forbid. For nothing exists devoid of God's power. For if there were he would be limited and subject to duality, God forbid. Rather, God is everything that exists, but everything that exists is not God. Nothing is devoid of his godliness. Everything is within it. There is nothing but it. It seems like this is a quote from somewhere. Oh, there you go. Rav Moshe Cordovero. This is coming from someone who in Hebrew is known as the Ramak. He was the teacher of the Arizal. So if you ever heard of the Arizal, who was his yahrzeit was actually just this past Sunday. The Arizal passed away in 1572, and he's obviously the father of Lurianic Kabbalah. His name was Rabbi Isaac Luria, and he was one of the biggest teachers of Kabbalah. And his teacher was Rav Moshe Cordovero. And Rav Moshe Cordovero, or known as the Ramak, passed away, if I'm not mistaken, 2 years prior to his disciple. So he passed away in 1570. They're buried right next to each other in Tzfat, in the north of Israel. But just this one line over there is incredible. I mean, the whole paragraph is incredible. God is everything that exists, but everything that exists is not God.
That
I
makes
love,
no sense to me
I
whatsoever.
love that line. So Thomas doesn't. I don't know if you don't agree with it. You just don't
No,
understand
I
it,
don't
right?
understand it.
Okay, so let's try to explain that. God is everything that exists, but everything is not God. Yaakov, you're first on the screen over here, so I'm going to give you the rights to explain it to Thomas.
Deal. Because I was gonna ask a question about
Oh,
the nothingness, but
yeah,
this kind of went into it. If you think of it like a drop of water, like a
yeah,
raindrop, right? Rain comes from the ocean. We all know this. Rain comes from the ocean, goes in the sky, it
yeah,
lets it out on the ground, it rains. But when the raindrop is in the ocean, it's no longer a raindrop, it's ocean water. But when it goes up into the sky and it drops, it becomes rainwater and it's no longer part of the ocean, but it's the same thing. Does that make sense?
yeah. Does that make sense?
Sure, it's a good analogy. Kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes. Think about it.
Okay.
That's the way it was explained to me as us being part of God, right? Because when God created everything out of Himself. So therefore, nothing is not of God. There is nothing independent, like the Hasidic thought taught, right?
Nice.
But we are individual apart from God when we're not energy to energy, if you know what I mean. If we're in the flesh, right? And so therefore we learn and we experience, and when this time ends and we go back to where we came from, like I think that Song of Solomon talks about, right? When the body returns to the earth and the soul returns to where it came from, right? Our experiences are shared, so therefore we're that drop of water that made it back to the ocean.
Nice. Anyone else have a thought on this? What does it mean that God is everything, but everything is not God? All right. I think
We don't worship anything but God. We don't worship.
absolutely, but I don't know if that's
God.
related to this. And the Robin is saying the tree behind me is a part of God, but the tree is not God.
We are. We're part of Hashem, but we are not Hashem.
Right. Okay. All right. I say we're gonna continue understanding this as we continue the text. Chapter 1, 2, and 3 will continue explaining this even more. So I say we'll continue inside, but definitely something we'll have to expound on. And thank you, Yaakov. Let's go back inside. Okay, back to the story of the rock. The need for a constant, we're on the top of the Kindle page or the top of 23. The need for a constant sustaining force points to a crippling fragility which plagues the existence of all matter. The rock, in our analogy, never changes in substance or character. It has not become a new species of flying rock. Rather, it is a rock that happens to be flying due to an acquired quality of kinetic motion. Ongoing creation teaches us that even when the world does enjoy existence, that existence is an acquired property and not an inherent one. In the same way that even as it soars upwards, the stone's natural tendency is to fall downwards, the universe tends towards self-annihilation and reabsorption back into its divine source. The apparently static phenomenon of the world's independent existence is, in fact, dynamically sustained by a constant creative drive. So it's a constant creation that's happening. And if you want to see further, there's the teaching of Rabbi El Khan, who was one of the greatest Hasidim of our generation. He just passed away 2 years ago, and his yahrzeit was actually this past Monday, his second yahrzeit. So, but he explains this at length. So the Tanya traces a source for this teaching of the Baal Shem Tov in the writing of Arizal. The Arizal, again, is Rabbi Isaac Luria of blessed memory, and he writes as follows. That is why Rabbi Isaac, glory of blessed memory, the Arizal taught that even within completely inert matter, such as stones, earth, and water, there is a soul, a spiritual energy. Even stones and dirt are alive in the sense that God's life energy must constantly be pumped into them to maintain their existence. And this is nothing other than the energy from letters of God's speech in the 10 Testaments of Genesis, embodied in the stones, earth, and water. This energy from the letters brings these inert things into being and sustains their existence to be something out of the null and void that was before the 6 days of Genesis. The withdrawal of God's creating and sustaining force to a thing would not only bring the thing itself to an end, it would eradicate the very idea of that thing. So meaning if the God's energy would be withdrawn, would be removed, not only would it cease existing, the idea that it even existed would be null and void. All its manifestation, past, present, and future, would cease to be, just like before the 6 days of Genesis. So this is a teaching that the Baal Shem Tov quotes from the Arizal. So the Alter Rebbe is quoting a teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, and this is taken from the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, from several hundred years prior, that not only animals and humans and plants have a godly energy, but even inert objects like stone, water, etc., have the divine life energy. And it's just in terms of our teaching of how we know it, everywhere we go, we have to be sensitive, not only to the people that are there or to the animals that are there, but even to the stones that we're walking on. You know, it says when Mashiach comes, the stones that we walked on will yell at us and say, "What were you thinking when you walked to me and you started gossiping?" Meaning, even there's an energy that's within them. So obviously now they can't speak, but there still is the life energy that a stone has or anything inanimate has that we have to be cognizant of. And for the sake of the teaching over here, that there's a life energy that's giving it creation, and it's having that divine energy. Let's see another practical lesson now on page 23. God's creative energy in the form of letters is downgraded through switching and exchanging letters so as to be compatible. Oh, this is a really good important lesson. So as to be compatible with the universe. Each created thing has its own unique code of letters. The more switching, exchanging takes place, the more the energy in the letters is diminished. Through this process, the divine presence that fills the world has millions of different faces. So in Hebrew, this is known as Khalifa or Truma, which is the idea where we have 120, when God created the universe using his utterance, if I'm not mistaken, there was a total of 120 words that God used. Each of those words has the letters, and it comprises all the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. But now everything of creation, God didn't speak every word of creation. God spoke of the water. God spoke, let there be the firmament. God spoke, let there be animals, etc. But God didn't talk about a stone. God didn't talk about a table. How did all that come into being, or how do we know that that still has the divine life energy of God? Is through exchange of letters. So all the letters together, there's a different code from those letters that are used to create everything of our world.
Can you explain the difference between the 10 and the 120?
Well, it's 10 utterances, 10 like phrases. Let there be water was considered one utterance.
Okay.
But out of that utterance, there was, let's say, 6 words or 10 words.
Okay.
So out of all 10
Words
utterances,
that came from that.
there was 120 words.
Thank
Exactly.
you.
Okay. Let's, God willing, if I remember, after the class, there's a beautiful on Chabad.org. I share this general idea to bar mitzvah boys, and there's a beautiful cartoon on Chabad.org that is, very deep Kabbalah bites or Kabbalah tunes, it's called, and it explains this idea in a really nice way. I'll see if I could, pull that up. Yes, Lynn.
Yes, I knew that phrase about the stones was just resonating. I had to look it up. So I didn't remember it I knew it was in the prophets, but in Habakkuk 2:11, it's talking about the sins of people. And it says, surely the stone will cry out from the wall. The rafter will answer from the framework. It's like there's a resident energy that's absorbed and retained there. And I have a friend who's a harp musician. And when he went to Jerusalem for the first time, he said he was struck by the vibration of the walls, that they were talking to him, the stones. And his wife's a librarian, said they did not talk. He said, those stones were talking to me. And then he wrote the most beautiful harp music. It's called something like Jerusalem or something like that. But I think there is a sense where their energy is retained, and at some point those stones will cry out.
That's incredible. There's a lot of stories of when it comes to modesty, when no one's looking, how we behave for the walls of our home. Like even if there's no one there, but the walls are there, and even though now they can't speak, there's a certain level of awareness that even they would have, that we have to be cognizant of. So it's the same idea where there's something absorbed in there. It's a whole new level, right? That's a whole different level. I love it.
You hear stories about women saying the walls did not even see my head uncovered.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
There's that's a famous story of a woman who merited, if I'm not mistaken, to have 7 sons that were the Kohen Gadol, were the high priests in the temple. And they asked her, "What did you do to merit this?" And she says, "How I behaved even in my home when no one was looking, even in front of the walls of my home, I was extremely modest," which is a whole new level, exactly. Okay, let's continue inside section 2, which is channels of flow. Let me pause 1 second. Sorry guys for the there's just a famous Kabbalah tune. I guess I'm not going to find it out. Sorry guys for the all right, sorry. I'm going to send it, God willing, after the class. I'll send you guys a cute Kabbalah tune. I'm just not sure which one it is. Okay, we'll have to do it later. All right, section 2, here we go. This is titled Channels of Flow. In chapter 2, so meaning later on, we will continue to explore the idea of continual creation and its implications. For the rest of this chapter, we will address another more technical issue concerning the creation of the universe through divine letters. Obviously, the 10 statements with which the earth was created do not specify every species of plant, animal, and every type of inert matter. How then do the letters of these 10 statements energize everything in the universe? So that's what he's going to answer now. And while the term stone is not mentioned in the 10 statements of Genesis in the Torah, so how can we argue that this is the letters of the word stone, that it is the letters of the word stone that energizes all stones and brings them into being? Nevertheless, the stone still receives its energy through letters from the 10 statements, but in order to form the word stone, letters must be rearranged and switched. Ultimately, the energy of any object can be traced back to the letters of the 10 statements. But in most instances, those letters will have to be rearranged and switched so as to be compatible with each individual object. The method of this arrangement follows the rotation of the wheel of 231 gates in forward and reverse, stated in Sefer Yetzirah. So this is obviously deep Kabbalistic stuff that we're going to be a little bit privy to. And the translator here is going to quote it a little bit for us. Let's see it inside. The wheel of 231 gates is a heavenly exchange system where the energy of one letter can be switched for the energy of any other. The wheel is drawn by placing all 22 letters on the circumference of a circle and connecting each letter to every other letter with a line, which results in 231 pathways. So I'm not a mathematician, but if you put every letter of the 22 letters in a circle, and you connect each letter to the others, you have 231 pathways. Does that make sense? Anyone?
I understand, yeah.
What would that math be? That's 200. That's
I don't know about the math, but I mean, it makes sense that every letter is connected to every other letter. I don't know, I'm not sure about the math right now.
okay. I got pretty close. 22. Okay, let's see it inside. The quote from this Kabbalah is called Sefer Yetzirah, which is the book of formation. And he quotes it like this: 22 elemental letters. He engraved them, carved them, weighed them, permuted them, and transposed them, forming with them everything formed and everything destined to be formed. These are referring to the 22 Hebrew letters. 22 elemental letters. He set them in a wheel with 231 gates, turning forward and backward. How did he permute them? Aleph with them all of them with Aleph, Bet with them all of them with Bet. And so with all the letters, turning round and round within 231 gates. So all the letters have a code or an exchange with other letters, and everything in the world, from a stone to a rock, to a table, etc., are made up of a different composition of the 22 letters from these 231, I guess, exchange.
This includes things that aren't discovered yet.
Oh, I guess so. Yeah, right. It includes everything in creation. Yeah. The rearrangement of letters of the 10 statements continues through the wheel until the eventual result is the word Evan or stone, which is the life force of the stone. And the same is true for all the created objects in the world. The names which they are called in biblical Hebrew, which is the sacred tongue, Lashon HaKodesh, are nothing other than the letter spoken in the 10 statements of Genesis in the Torah after passing down from level to level. Through switching and exchanging the letters through the 231 gates, to the point at which those letters can reach and become embodied in that creation to energize it because they spell its name. The Tanya refers to two different methods of rearranging letters: switching, which in Hebrew is chiluch, and exchanging, which is timura. While these two methods sound similar, they do in fact differ as much as the heavens transcend the earth. So there's actually a huge difference, similar to heavens and earth. That's the difference between these two different types of exchanges and switches. Switching is a process of taking the same letters and changing their order, like an anagram. When letters are exchanged, they are swapped for different letters through the wheel, which are then arranged into the desired word. Exchanging the letters is a different process because it diminishes energy significantly, much more so than with switching. But this is actually a helpful thing, as the Tanya will now explain. So just to pause here for a second, we're getting into some pretty deep Kabbalah ideas. There had to be, of the 231 gates, which are the 231 connections of letters, that's what everything in the world is being created from these different connections. There's a way of how it is being switched, which means it's the same letter and just changing the order, it's just switching where the letters are, or exchanges, which means the letters are actually being substituted for another letter. The exchange is much more of a lower energy of divine life force that's coming through because it's a different letter entirely. So that's going to be helpful of understanding of how the creation of the world is able to happen. This process is necessary because individual created objects can receive their energy directly from the energy of the 10 statements of Genesis and the Torah, because the energy flowing from the 10 statements themselves is much too great for individual creations to receive. And they are only able to receive this energy once the energy has been downgraded multiple levels through switching and exchanging letters. I guess we'll read just a little further. And then I want to read, there's a practical lesson also. Why do we need switching and exchanging at all? Why did God not simply list every entity that he wished to create in the 10 statements of Genesis? The Tanya answers, the 10 statements contain a raw, primordial energy that, generally speaking, is too great for individual creations. Switching and exchanging is the necessary process by which this raw energy is downgraded multiple levels so that it can be compatible with ordinary creations. So I just want to explain. Oh yeah, go ahead. Oh, I just want to explain this idea because we're getting into pretty Kabbalah, pretty in depth. One of the basics to know, and I think I shared this either last week or the week before. There's a beautiful idea of how important the Hebrew letters are, where in general we say you could pray in any language, but from here we're learning that there's something so powerful and potent in the Hebrew letters themselves. So of course, whatever you don't understand in Hebrew, you should say in the English, but from whatever you can, try and attempt to learn it in the Hebrew and understand it in the Hebrew, because there's something so powerful in the letters of the Hebrew themselves. I'll just give you a quick example. In the Amida, one of the blessings we say is a blessing, a prayer for healing. And in the Hebrew, there's 27 words in that blessing. It's called Refeinu Hashem, may God heal. And the numbers 27 are actually very potent in the power of healing in Torah. So there's something special about reading the Hebrew that is comprised of 27 words, because it has, or for example, in the Shema, we know in the Shema itself, there's 248 words. If you read the Shema from beginning to end, the 3 paragraphs, you're reciting 248 words. And when you recite it, it brings a health and a vivifying energy to the 248 limbs of our body. So there's something powerful when we say things in the Hebrew, there's a potency that's there. Well, the way we're saying it here is the 10 utterances, which were obviously uttered by God in Hebrew, have a very strong raw energy. And therefore, in order to create the rest of the objects of creation, God didn't utter them also. God actually rather made an exchange of letters in order for every single creation to come into being. And the reason is because the energy of those 10 utterances were too strong or too raw, and it would be too much energy to be able to be compatible to create the different parts of creation. And therefore, it's taken from exchanges and switches in order to make that possible. We're actually almost finished the chapter. Oh, do you have a question? Yeah.
No, I was gonna say, so I came up with how you come up.
Oh,
with
the 231? Oh, let me
Yeah, so it's the sum of all the numbers from 1 to 21. And so it actually works for anything. If you had 5 letters, for instance, be 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. So it works perfectly. So yeah, in the case of 22 letters, it's 1 plus 2 plus 3 up to plus 20 plus 21, and that gives you the 231.
Very cool. And that makes sense because
Sum.
it's the one letter comprising of all the other 21.
So that's the number of connections that you can make between the two
amazing.
letters.
Okay, cool.
So it's the sum of 1 to 21.
Very cool.
Just all the different.
Thank you, Thomas. It's good having an engineer here.
Now.
Thank you. All right, we're going to try to finish a chapter, and my computer is not plugged in, and I got to notice that we're on low battery. But if we have divine energy giving life force to my computer, we have nothing to fear because the Hebrew letters are still in there, right? Let's see. Why do we need that? We said that. So if you're looking in the book, it's on 27 at the top. And Lynn, I'll hold off just for a moment. Just wanted to try to finish another few paragraphs, and then we'll go to the question. But absolutely, let's see this at the top. So far, we have learned that energy may be dimmed through either switching or be exchanging of letters. We will now learn of a third method, which results in an even greater dimming of light. And see, and many of you are actually familiar with this because on Shabbat I mentioned this, every now and then through what's known in Hebrew as gematriot, which, or in singular, would be a gematria. The exchange of letters based on their numerical values. So we know that when you have a value in Hebrew, every word, every letter actually has a number. So a gematria is the numerology of a certain word, and everything has a numerology. In Hebrew, it's called the gematria. So through gematria, letters are exchanged into numbers, and then back into letters again. These additional transmutations result in a greater diminishing of the light than through exchanging. So when you do a gematria, which means you're taking a word or taking a letter, switching it to a number, and then bringing it back into a letter, it's even more of a diminishment than the exchanging of letters. The three processes of A, switching, B, exchanging, and C is gematria are needed to dim the raw primordial light of the 10 statements to the point where the energy has been sufficiently diminished so that it can become embodied in that particular creation to bring it into existence. The final product of manipulating all these letters is a Hebrew word. And this is the name by which this particular creation is called in the sacred tongue, or in biblical Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh. An object's name in biblical Hebrew is not a mere convention applied for the purpose of identification. It is the very life force of that object. The name can be traced back to the raw energy of the 10 statements, after which letters were processed and diminished by switching, exchanging, and gematrias. That name is the vessel which delivers the diminished energy found in the letters of this name, which are a derivative of the 10 statements of the Torah that have the power and energy to create something from nothing and to energize it forever, since the Torah and God are totally one. The Torah is not merely authored by God, its letters represent an encapsulation of God's energy. Just as God has the power to create, his letters in the Torah possess that power too, since the Torah and God are totally one. We will elaborate on this point on later on in chapter 12. If we're looking back in the book, I'm just going to read the final practical lesson page, on the chapter. The letters of the Torah have creative power because Torah and God are one. So I love this idea where the letters are not just stagnant. There's creative power in them because they're coming from God. And therefore God and the Torah are one. And the letters are in the Torah. Don't look at the Torah as a mere storybook or body of law. It is nothing less than the name of God himself. Divine energy arranged in letter packets. So if you're looking at the Torah, it's a living Torah. It's a creative Torah. And it's literally it's a power of creation, because the Torah, which are comprised of all the letters, are what's giving life force for everything in the world, and that's God himself. So it's nothing less than the name of God himself. Okay, yes, Lynn, let's take questions.
Okay, I know we're out of time. So first thing is I bought this Yom Yom and it's so tiny, only in Hebrew. I'd like to send it to you, and if somebody would like it, I'd love to give it to them, because not only is it all in Hebrew, it's in miniature. So do you mind if I want to get a bigger one with English and Hebrew, so I'll try again.
I'll give you, actually, I'll send you a link, and God willing, I'll do it in I have another link I want to send about the Kabbalah tunes. There's a really nice Hayom Yom that has the Hebrew and the English with a little bit of a thought to go on it. And it's a much bigger book. And I'll send you the link.
Your kids or somebody with really good eyes can read this one. And then my other question for another time is, what do we do with, we know that the Torah was edited and redacted. So we don't have an original, we don't even have an original of it. We have copies of copies. So maybe you can share that another time. And that's just a long question that I've had for quite a while.
Wait, what's your question? The question is that the original Torah that Moshe wrote, we no
Right, we
longer
don't
have.
have it. We don't have it, and it's been edited and redacted, and we know that the way that it's been knit together.
But why do you say it was edited? Like, where do you get that word from in the Torah? It's the
Um,
same Torah.
because it connects to a lot of other things. So it it might not be the original form that Moshe wrote it in. It might have been, at least these are theories, that Ezra did something, or in different times when it was put together all in one book into the Tanakh, that there was some editing done in the process. And I don't know, maybe you don't hold to that, but it's a interesting question.
Well, and you say it was editing because of the censors? Like there were people that were sensing it, and they
No,
had to.
no, just so much of it is numerical and it all fits together. These, like the 10 sayings, and how the sevens are all the way through, but you see how the early prophets and the latter prophets all create over this. And so it looks like somebody else has touched it to bring it together in kind of like a final form before it was written. So it's
Interesting.
very
So,
cohesive. Yeah.
okay, and Ava is putting in the note a very good question: is how would we ever know? So we could definitely debate it. There is a famous story of if I'm not mistaken, it was a Greek king that wanted. He took 10. It was one of the. It's considered one of the incredible miracles that the Talmud lists out. That he took 10 of the greatest rabbis and he put them in separate rooms, and he asked them all to translate the Torah into, if I'm not mistaken, it was Greek. And they knew that there were certain parts that are going to come out as not controversial, but like almost like admitting from the Torah that there could be another existence or another deity, God forbid, just the way it's worded in the Torah. So even without consulting with the rest of them, miraculously, they all switched the exact same parts of the Torah in order to satisfy the king and not be punished by him proving, look, the Torah is false, or there's other deities. The two in the first few chapters, the Hebrew words Bereshit, bara Elokim, which literally the way we translate it is, in the beginning God created. In the Hebrew, it could almost seem Bereshit, almost like a god called Bereshit, created Elokim. So it almost seems like there's a God before Elokim. So in all of their translations, without even consulting with the rest of them, they all switched it to Elokim bara Bereshit, which means God created in the beginning.
Yeah.
Another one that's very famous is when God said, "Let us create man in our image." Nasa Adam b'tzalmeinu, let us create man in our image. It almost is like God consulting with other gods. Let us, almost like God didn't create himself. Rashi obviously says God was consulting with the angels, but when you're just reading the text, the raw text, it could come off as very controversial. So again, there they tweaked it. So that type of editing, Lynn, I definitely heard for the sake of a censor, or for the sake of peace, but I never heard of like editing, and like Ava said, how would we know? But I think it's a very one of the 13 principles of faith is the Torah that we have is from Moshe, and it was never edited, it was never touched, it was never changed. And it's actually a mitzvah in the Torah, right? We're not allowed to increase, we're not allowed to add anything in the Torah, we're not allowed to take off anything in the Torah. The Torah that we have is the Torah of Moshe, and that's why it's called Moshe Emet, the Torah to Emet, right? It's actually a song in Hebrew that Moshe is true, and his Torah is truth, and the epitome of truth is something that never changes, right? Like the politician would be the opposite of truth because they change every day, right?
Thank you. I appreciate your perspective. It's just, that in the academic world, it's
Absolutely.
very
For
different.
sure.
So I love hearing that. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you guys. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you for that.